Welcome everyone to the final session of the A4S Summit Plenary Day. My name is Brad Sparks. I'm Executive Director of A4S in the US and have the privilege of chairing the last session, which will be focused on trends as we go into 2022. As with every A4S Summit, we've had a full day that's focused on actions that the finance community can take to build a resilient and sustainable future. The sessions have covered a range of topics from integrating natural, social, and human capital into financial decision-making, discussing the ability of finance teams to respond to the quickly evolving corporate reporting and disclosure landscape, and the potential for innovative technologies to drive forward on the road from COP26. We've also had the launch of the Asia Pacific chapter of the A4S CFO Leadership Network, joining our other chapters across Europe, Canada, and the United States. All of these sessions are available for playback via the Summit website, and they'll also be available in the new year at a4s.org. We also hope you'll explore some of the resources we have available on our website in more detail and encourage you to share those with others. So our final session today, as I mentioned before, we'll look at the key trends shaping 2022 with a panel of leaders. And we'll also highlight some of the themes noted in the recent A4S Finance Leaders Sustainability Barometer. We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, let's begin with the recent conversation between Jessica Fries of A4S and the chair of the A4S Board of Trustees, Robin Stalker. Let's have a look.
Robin, it's fantastic to have you with us. We've known each other and worked together for a number of years now around A4S's work, and particularly thinking of your role as CFO of Adidas in the past, and now on the board of a number of companies, including Commerzbank, Hugo Boss, Schaeffler, and many others. I'd love to get your perspective. You worked in that finance world for your whole career. Yeah. How have attitudes towards sustainability changed over that time? And what do you think has been driving the change?
Well, thank you, Jessica. It's lovely to have this opportunity to talk about this subject with you in this forum. I mean, I think as we've seen throughout all of society as a whole, obviously, the awareness has improved considerably over the last few years. The awareness about our environment, about climate change specifically, about biodiversity, and that's good. I mean, thankfully, the awareness has improved. And attitudes, particularly in the companies, I believe, have moved or developed from more an attempt to manage or at least recognize specific risks or industry-specific risks, to recognizing that actually there's a corporate responsibility here, and potentially also that doing something in this direction is actually good for their own business. And I think that's been caused by several factors, obviously. It's a combination of all these things together, I suppose. But for me, three things stand out. One is the interest shown by the whole range of stakeholders. I mean, obviously, they have customers who are taking a greater interest in this. We have our employees wanting to know who they're working for and what is our purpose as a company, what are we doing in certain areas. And of course, we have the investor community, who at the very least is starting to ask for information. Whether they act on it or not is another thing, but at least they've been asking for this. Secondly, I believe the move by the regulators to require more transparency on these subjects has been also very important for this change in attitude. And I think thirdly, we should not underestimate the impact of really harsh climate-related events that we've seen throughout the world recently, and how we've reacted to those, and the recognition that we all play a role here, and something needs to be done. And I think that combination and the recognition that, well, actually, we should be doing something here, that this is also fueling an understanding that, well, perhaps this is also good business to be doing this. And maybe we get competitive advantage of doing the right thing here, or at least we avoid a competitive disadvantage by perhaps not doing what is corporate and socially responsible in this respect. And I think it's incredibly encouraging to see how wide-ranging this change in attitude has been. But I'm not sure that we're quite yet at the tipping point. I mean, it's been fantastic to see what's come out of COP26 and the significant, and maybe it has been a tipping point in terms of awareness and definitely also public commitments. But we've still got a long way to go in terms of the doing. I mean, there's a massive transformation process throughout the world in all of our industries. And that still needs to be performed. And I think here, you need a lot of resources to do this. And resources, of course, not just technology or the funding. We also need skill sets, and we need to be able to identify and apply practical solutions. And we need those skill sets to find those. And it's finding and equipping people with these skill sets. I think that's also something specifically that A4S, I believe, is focused on.
Picking up on some of those points that you raised, if I think back to my career doing work in the sustainability space, I mean, even back when I was at PwC doing consulting, I think we all have talked for many years about, you know, how customers were going to be driving this agenda, investors are really starting to care, you know, some of those points. And for the A4S 10-year birthday, which is now 7 years ago, so we're nearly at our 20th birthday, we dug out this fantastic video that the Prince of Wales had done. I think it might have been called Grime Goes Green or something along these lines, with John Cleese, who is a very well known actor. Yeah. And in that, and it must, I mean, that must have been well a few decades earlier than our 10-year anniversary. Some of these same themes were being talked about. So what is different about now? Now you sit on a number of boards. Do you really feel that there is a shift in that conversation? And are there one or two things that you could really point to that mean that this is real, and that shift, that urgency, that embedding into the heart of business is really happening?
I think we definitely can see that, because I think that particular leaders in industry segments are already recognizing that their whole business model in the future, not just from a risk mitigation point of view, but from their existing, securing their existence, particularly the competitive advantage, they need to be realistically addressing these points about climate change and the requirement to get to net zero as quickly as possible. And that is a competitive necessity. And I believe sincerely here that at the very least, even if other participants in these industries are not fundamentally already aware of the corporate citizenship reasons why we should be doing this, coming from the point of view of being competitive and coming from the point of view of securing the future business model, I think they are forced to look at this now. And we're seeing lots of examples of this in terms of simply investors or customers in the supply chain asking for information because they themselves wish to report this, is forcing a lot of companies further down the line to identify data and record this and report this that they have previously not probably been focused on. And it might be just a well-used anecdote, but I actually believe that the very strong awareness over the last few months or year or so of the younger generation, when they just call out Fridays for the Future, but also because of this, that the conversation about what is the company that Dad's working in, what is their company doing, that bring this conversation to the breakfast table or to the evening table, where where one's asking, what is your company doing in this respect? I think that's also forced an honest reflection throughout management about, what is it that we're doing? And definitely if I look at what we're seeing in boards and audit committees, there's a very real awareness, not just because of the reporting requirements, but a very real awareness that this is something relevant for our business model going forward.
And you were touching there, I think, and earlier around that shift of focus to action. So you're seeing, whether it is governments, businesses, banks, investors setting ambitious sustainability targets across the full range of whether it's diversity, equity and inclusion, net zero climate targets, or tackling some of the other really pressing sustainability issues like biodiversity loss. How can finance really play a part in turning those commitments into action, and action at the kind of pace and scale we really need?
I think I heard recently, or in fact, it's probably been repeated, several prominent observers saying that, or at least suggesting that accountants can save the planet. Well, probably not alone, but hey, accountants of the world unite. This is our time, because let's face it, what gets measured gets done, and it is our time, because I would suggest that moving from commitment into action will not be successful unless we see leadership from the financial community. And here I mean specifically also, accountants and finance professionals within companies. Now, of course, I presumably need to admit a certain bias as an ex-CFO, but CFOs are uniquely positioned here, and with the broader finance functions, obviously, within companies. But we're uniquely positioned because our functions are throughout every organization. We are there to provide independent, neutral information. We're there to provide and ensure best decision making. We provide the data and hopefully guarantee the integrity of the data to make best decisions. So I think in the first instance, we need to make sure that the finance function provides management with information on those trade-off scenarios that management will need to take in terms of making the right decisions here for their particular individual business models, but also the broader aspect of how that is then communicated externally, so that investors or banks and other providers of finance can make the right decisions. They can base their decisions on information that is not just credible, but also hopefully comparable. And we've struggled over the past few years, even though, for instance, here in Europe, we've had the requirement to report non-financial KPIs in certain areas covering most ESG aspects for some years. The lack of standardization has been a challenge. And now initiatives such as A4S Foundation's International Sustainable Standards report, that's going to be great. But that's also going to take some time, I suspect. And so there's still a significant need for us to, in our own industries, come up with the data that we believe is relevant to provide our management to make those right decisions. And we need to be credible in this respect. And I think if we look at the governance aspect of this also in the audit committees, there's a significant role that audit committees have, not just in the previously looking at were the risks correctly identified and documented, but here, are we being clear on what the strategy of the organization is in terms of how it's impacted by sustainability issues. What is it that management intends to do? How are they making those decisions? What is the credibility of the systems that they're getting this information from? We need to work with the external auditors. We need to work, obviously, also to understand that the goals that our companies are presenting are realistic and credible, and we need to also measure then the progress on those goals. And so I think finance is a fundamental part of this transformation from just making the commitment or the identifying the what needs to be done to actually ensuring that it is done.
And if there's one action that you'd really like to call out, now, of course, nothing is ever as simple as one action, but if there's one thing that you would really like to put a spotlight on that for the finance and accounting community to take that's going to deliver the biggest impact, what do you feel is the really essential area of focus?
You mean how can accountants
save the world? Absolutely.
Well, it's not going to happen in 12 months, but I do think, I mean, basically, as I said, we're fundamentally in finance responsible for ensuring that people are put in the best position to make the best decisions. And so we provide that information, we provide that data. And I think what we need to do over the next 12 months is we need to continue to work on improving that transparency. We don't have all the data. Our companies do not have all the data at the moment. We don't have the data in a form that necessarily allows us to make all these decisions immediately. But that is a job that finance has to do. And I think that we therefore make a significant impact by providing that increased transparency and ensuring also, as I said in the last answer, that we identify the goals of organizations. A lot of it has been broadly communicated and very high level at least, but we get these goals articulated in a form that allows us to put facts and figures against these and allow us to measure the progress on this so that we ensure that what does get reported or measured does actually get done. And I think that is a significant contribution. And if we can improve on that over the next 12 months, then I think that the accounting profession and the finance professionals have done a great service. But hey, that's what finance guys do.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Robin. Really good to speak with you and hear your thoughts for this session.
Thanks very much for having me, Jessica. All the very best.
All right. Well, I think that's great framing for the panel discussion we have coming up next. And for this discussion, I'll be joined by Jessica Fries, Exec Chair of A4S, also Mark Hawkins, the Chair of A4S's Advisory Council, and also the former CFO of Salesforce. Mark was also the founding CFO of our A4S US CFO Leadership Network as well, and sits on a number of different corporate boards. And then also we hope to shortly be joined by Emma Howard-Boyd as well. Emma serves as the chair of the UK's Environment Agency, the co-chair of the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, and the founder of the 30% Club, which has increased the percentage of women serving on boards. She's also a member of the A4S Board of Trustees. So thank you all for participating in this panel conversation to talk about what Robin was just describing, and that is how can the finance community really get more engaged and involved to help make sure that what gets measured also gets done. Throughout this panel discussion, I'd also like to add that we welcome your questions in the Q&A function below. So please put those in the Q&A feature, and we will try to answer as many as we can as we go through the next 30 minutes. So why don't we begin maybe with Jessica? And one of the things that was referenced earlier was the A4S Finance Leaders Sustainability Barometer. And I know you've been close to some of the initial findings from the barometer, and those findings have both help inform our activities today, but also some of the activities A4S will be doing over the course of the next year across our different networks. And I was hoping you could summarize some of those key insights that have been learned from the barometer so far.
Thanks a lot, Brad. And great to be back here and share some of the early insights from the barometer. And just to add, if any of you haven't completed it yet, there is definitely still time. So we're giving a bit of a sneak preview into some of the first findings. So what we were keen to do is really understand what kind of progress is being made. And where we really need to dig into in more detail to help people to overcome some of those challenges. So whether that's through the work we do with our CFO Leadership Network or the broader finance and accounting community. And one of the questions we were exploring is where are people seeing the key ESG related risks for their organizations, and where are some of those key ESG related opportunities, and how much do the two match up? So in terms of the top three risks, the first one, definitely, I think no surprise to anyone, is that failure to mitigate or adapt to climate change. We've been talking about that quite a lot over the course of the discussion today. It's clearly top of mind for a lot of organizations as we start to experience more and more of the physical impacts. And going back to COP26, you saw more and more commitments to net zero and accelerating the transition. But a lot of risks if we fail to do that. Secondly, the failure to adapt quickly enough to those changing customer, investor, employee or regulatory demands to adopt a sustainable business model and sustainable business practices. We've seen a really rapid shift. So again, that one I suspect isn't a surprise to many, because we picked up on it on that discussion with Robin just then. It's been a really rapid change. A lot of people have been talking about some of these issues for a long time, but it's felt like it's a bit on the side, corporate responsibility, not at the heart of business. And I think that those who maybe didn't react early are worried that they might be being caught out by the shift that's happening now. And then thirdly, inability to attract and retain the right talent. We're seeing across the board a lot of issues in terms of that whole question of talent, and how do we really get the teams that we need. And I think that there's a connection between these three, of course, because we are seeing more and more people engaged and keen to work for companies that do have sustainability at the forefront of the agenda. And that was something that the last discussion with Ruth Porritt focused on technology, but that whole question of attracting talent really came through very clearly. And then the top three ESG related opportunities. So definitely here you are seeing some of that mirror. So the first one around the solutions to tackle the climate crisis, and really coming up with some of those solutions. Secondly, some of the new technologies and innovations that could shape sustainable outcomes and improve diversity. And then thirdly, that real focus on improving diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those were the top three risks and the top three opportunities that we saw coming through.
Great, thanks, Jessica. And I wonder, Mark, hearing what Jessica's just described around ESG related risk and opportunities, does that seem consistent with what you've experienced? What are your thoughts and perspectives on what was just described?
I think it was a great articulation of what's on people's minds. And I think what's encouraging is, this signal has been growing from all the stakeholders in terms of the expectations, and climate change. The nature of the problem is being better understood. And there's a growing understanding that this is one of the top priorities in the world for all organizations, civil society, businesses, governments to work together on. And I think she's called out very clearly that people's mindset has shifted from trying to understand the problem to now let's get in front of the problem. And I think that's really what the opportunity is to get in front of the problem and act now with urgency. I think the science is clear. I think the growing expectations from shareholders, from all stakeholders, in particular on this climate change urgency, I think is ever clear. And I think it's now up for all of us to really rise and meet the moment and be the leaders and exercise the influence that we have within finance, within the broader business community, to really help meet that moment. And I think that's a little bit of what I hear when I listen to Jessica.
Great, and I think that's consistent, Mark, with what we're seeing at A4S, right? Recognizing the need to meet this unique moment and getting in front of it. From our work, I think we see that there's now been a decisive shift in terms of recognition that sustainability is a business issue and that organizations need to respond. Part of the barometer asked about this, and 90% of the respondents felt that it was essential or very important for businesses to transform financial decision-making to reflect those opportunities and risks posed by ESG issues. Some of the key drivers for that shift that were also noted in the barometer were perhaps unsurprisingly business related, so mitigating risk, employee engagement, customer or client demand. So we've started to really see a clear shift moving beyond the why, and the challenge now is grappling with the how side of the equation. And Jessica, as we think about the key challenges that CFOs and others in the finance community are facing with the how, what are some thoughts around what those challenges and issues are?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. And I think it's definitely clear as the barometer has highlighted, but also I think we really are seeing that in the discussions that we've had today and our work more broadly, that shift in awareness. But as we've highlighted, we need to really find ways to take action and take action at scale and rapidly. And that's certainly one of the key things that has come through from the barometer as well. So how can we integrate into decision making? And here it was interesting to see only 2% of respondents really felt that they had fully integrated ESG factors into decision making. Only 9% felt they had the majority of tools and techniques in place to enable them to do that integration. And a quarter felt that their decisions were still being made almost exclusively on financial considerations. So I think that really highlights that there's still a huge amount of work to do in terms of both awareness of the tools that are out there. And so there's something that A4S has been working on for a long time around the Essential Guide series. They're focused specifically for that finance community. But I think that provides one useful starting point. But then also, I think that there are some of those areas that people are really grappling with. We touched earlier on something like net zero, where a lot of organizations, I don't think anyone has all of the answers yet. So there needs to be that adoption of what is there, and then a rapid scaling up of some of the additional areas. Now, there were also quite a few barriers cited. And I guess this comes back to some of the comments Judith made earlier, that a key issue was data still, unreliable data. So 54% felt that was significant or very significant. Universal standards and frameworks, and hopefully we are making some progress there as well. And then that challenge of keeping ESG at the top of the list of to-do items. So really struggling with other organizational priorities and how they could really lean into this agenda to the extent that they need to. Now, of course, the more that an organization really sees that connection between their strategy and the decisions they're taking, I think the easier that becomes. But I think that is quite a strong reminder. And then one final thing that I'd like to just call out here is around the TCFD recommendations, one of the areas we did a bit of deep dive on within the barometer. And you almost saw a split. So some organizations who had clearly been focusing on the Task Force on Climate-related Disclosures early and felt that they had really made quite a lot of progress and were quite a long way towards reporting against that framework. Whereas there was still quite a significant percentage who said that they hadn't got started at all. And so I think that you really see that advantage being played out for those early adopters, particularly now that we see mandatory requirements coming in quickly here. Now, I'd love to share a little bit on some of the work we're doing with the Asset Owners Network as well, but maybe this is, Mark, I'd maybe hand back to you and Brad to get your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I'd love to just throw out a couple of comments on that, if I may. Thank you for that. I thought very well articulated. For me, there's always this dilemma between perfection, which can actually slow down progress. And anytime, one's building something great and innovating, all the answers are not always there at the beginning, but you know the direction of what you need to take to be able to go on the path of discovery to get to the ultimate improvement. And as Jessica said, the time is to act now. And there's so much to be done now. There's so much to get clear on. People, I do believe, have understood the nature of the problem now. I think the vision of making sustainable business models business as usual, I think, is a powerful concept. And then one has to shift from, there's an old saying that if you have a vision and no pathway, you have a lot of wheel spinning. If you have a pathway and no vision, you have a lot of activity without an end goal. But when you have a pathway and a vision, you can change the world. And that pattern's repeated again and again and again. I think the vision is clear and there's coalescence on that. I think the pathway, we can begin to try to help people pragmatically today walk out of this conference and elect to do things and utilize their full influence. I think it's incredible sometimes people can underestimate the impact that they can have, or that I can have, or that we can have on a topic this urgent. And I hope that we don't do that. I hope that instead we think about what a positive difference we can make and we lean into that. But to Jessica's point of shifting from understanding and a good articulation of the understanding, I would just say, Jessica, having been at a Dow 30 company that's been scaled up and growing for years, and the complexities of a global business, I could sit there and say that at the C level, there should be QBRs with the same intensity on this goal that a company sets of any of the other goals that they have. There's no reason not to. It's a very pragmatic action. I think people could use their media influence, their social media influence. That's a real action that could happen today. I think people could line up and commit to TCFD if they haven't already, and you can see the growing, swelling commitment to that. People could rise to meet the moment and do that. That is not something that's hard to contemplate, to get the company's head around net zero and really start making commitments and pathway to get there in the end. Green buildings, employee resource groups to engage the employees who want to be a purpose-led, as you said, Jessica, they want to be involved in a company that has a pathway to make their contribution to civil society on such an urgent topic. Recycling, science-based targets for the supply chain can be done by our procurement teams today. Resourcing, making sure our financial planning and decision-making integrates these topics today. Join A4S and learn more, like all of us have today. Brief your board regularly. Update your values and your value statement for your company. I mean, if you really want to have a noticeable change in a world that's looking for leaders to meet the moment, we could do that today. And I just think we could go on, but the expectations are rising. It's not just the temperature that's rising. And it's really time for us to really break it down with a pathway. And we could add, everybody in the conference could add to that list, but don't let perfection stop you from taking actions that clearly will take you in the right direction on where history's heading and how we can have a positive influence. So that's what I would say, Jessica, that's what I would say.
Great. Well, thanks, Mark. And I think now we have Emma able to join us. And if we think about, how do you find and navigate the right pathway to make sure sustainability performance is, measured in a consistent manner as other means of business and financial performance? Emma, at the UK Environment Agency, and in particular in your work as chair of their pension fund, you've done a lot to figure out what pathway to take and how to navigate that pathway. And I was hoping you can maybe open with some thoughts around, where are things headed? How have you integrated ESG issues within your own roles, and what are some perspectives you bring as we look forward to the year ahead?
Well, great to finally make it into the room, and hopefully you can hear me okay. And just to clarify, I chair the Environment Agency, and I was the chair of the investment committee for the Environment Agency Pension Fund, where we have over recent years been one of the smaller pension funds. We have over 4 billion sterling under management here, but because we have such close links to our beneficiaries, we have roughly 40,000 of those, 10,000 of those, 10,000 plus are current employees of the Environment Agency out on a daily basis at the forefront of the climate change agenda. We have worked very closely at integrating our work and thinking into the way we manage the pension fund. The organisation, the Environment Agency, we're the environmental regulator in England, and we also have responsibility for flood and coastal erosion risk management. And as an organisation, we have made a net zero commitment by 2030. But when it comes to our pension fund, where we are investing globally in most asset classes, we have taken a very rigorous approach to our net zero commitments and have actually set a target of 2045, because it is much more complex to reach net zero given the range of different companies, assets that we're investing in, the bits of our organisation, albeit that we are working with our contractors, that we are responsible for here in England. And I think that's something that I'd like to emphasize. It's brilliant that we're seeing so many companies sign up to make net zero commitments. We also need to see that replicated in pension funds as well. We've just had our first ever annual general meeting of the Environment Agency Pension Fund, and very, very strong endorsement for our net zero approach, potentially to speed some of that up. But we've also got to make it really clearly understood the differences in how we're managing a pension fund versus how we're looking at an organisation. The other thing that is so clear to us at the Environment Agency is the importance of preparing for climate shocks, whether it's the work that we're doing in the country to help England be ready for, in particular, floods, but droughts as well. And we want to see that work emphasised through our pension fund. As a relatively small pension fund, we do a lot of this work in collaboration with others. On net zero, with the church investment funds, we set up the Transition Pathway Initiative, now has 40 trillion assets under management supporting that. I've also been involved with the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, which now has $20 trillion looking at how to embed climate resilience into investment decision making. And those are the sorts of things that we need to be part of. I think the other thing that's really clear to us, both at the Environment Agency but through the pension fund, because of that closeness with our beneficiaries, with our colleagues, we have found it incredibly important to work with organisations like Share Action and Make My Money Matter, and certainly supportive of those campaigns and the urgency and understanding that others need to take to make sure that they are making their money matter. And so again, for those companies that have made net zero commitments, I'd encourage the pension funds, albeit the separate legal entity, to think very seriously about net zero commitments, albeit perhaps on a different time frame for those pools of assets as well. Thank you.
And maybe Emma, I mean, Brad, if you don't mind, if I just step in there, because I think that that was one of the areas that was really highlighted as least progress that people felt they were making in terms of the role that companies can play in thinking through their organization's pension arrangements. Now, in different parts of the world, that's clearly going to be different setups, different structures, different types of actions. But a really important role, and often regardless of the setup, you know, the CFO often does have a really strong influence role in terms of that connection to retirement benefits. And picking up on your point, Emma, around, you know, pension funds committing to net zero. One of your roles with A4S is chairing our asset owners network, and so with the chairs of those pension funds, we've been working through supporting them to be committing to net zero as chairs, so as leaders of those pension funds. And I think we now have 19 pension fund chairs who have signaled their collective commitment to net zero pension funds. And so definitely a call out to other chairs, you know, definitely join that grouping. And I think that peer-to-peer support is really important. And through that commitment, through the statement of support, you know, looking at how they can set in place that net zero pathway within 12 months. But
and to Mark's point,
to
Mark's point about don't wait for the perfect, there are so many different fund managers managing portfolios. Our pension fund is fully funded. It's delivering outperformance. It's value for money in that it has, as a sponsor, one of the lowest contribution rates in local government and civil service pension funds. What's not to like? And I would say it's because as much as part because we have taken this long-term view, embedding environmental and climate sustainability into the way we work with our fund managers, and just get on and do it. The other thing that we've done with our portfolio is we've got something called the Targeted Opportunities portfolio. And this is partly our hedge on the future. It allows us to work with new fund managers, new strategies. It allows us to invest up to 5% of the overall portfolio to take a risk on new ways of managing money through that climate change lens. And again, I would just encourage trustees to get on and do this, allocate money across. Again, we've just seen with some of our assets that we're shifting into Paris-aligned portfolios. All of this is working and delivering performance, and are things that you can do today, having gone through the due process.
Great. Well, thanks, Emma, for that. And I think as we think about getting on and doing it, one of the things you need to do that is to have the right people with the right skill sets to be able to help in this space. And so one of the things that we've been seeing around A4S is a massive increase in demand for people, particularly in the finance and accounting world, with some type of ESG expertise or ESG training. In fact, looking again at the barometer we did, 18% said sustainability or ESG competence is assessed as part of the recruitment and promotion decisions for most of all roles, right? So we're about a fifth of all roles having some consideration of sustainability or ESG competence, which is really remarkable kind of increase over the last several years, in my opinion, at least. And so I guess as we think about this need to address the knowledge gap and skills gap that's out there today, I wonder, Jessica, maybe we can just start first with you and what A4S is doing in this space, and then good to go also to you, Emma, to talk about maybe how boards can be educated, and to Mark to get your thoughts as well. But Jessica, first to you from an A4S perspective on the skills gap.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brad. And I think that, as Emma had just highlighted there, there's so many actions that some of the leading organizations have really taken. So one of the things that we're really focused on is the networks we work with. So whether that's the CFO community, asset owners, the accounting bodies network, which is a really important community to support the accountants to take action. So I do think thinking through, so from an A4S perspective, what networks we have and how we can really support that peer-to-peer dialogue and that acceleration of progress. And I think it, it helps to provide both that knowledge transfer and rapid knowledge transfer that we need, but I think importantly also the confidence to take action. I think sometimes people, if you're not hearing it from your peers, it can feel challenging, difficult. All of the barriers you might feel are the ones that come top of mind rather than the opportunities and the really positive energy that can flow from action. Briefly then, secondly, the academy. So tomorrow we have the graduation of our first cohort from the A4S Academy. They've gone through a really amazing journey over the last year and more, getting those skills, getting the knowledge, getting some of those, the soft side of things of how do you drive impact and change in the organization, and then really working with that academy network, so with their peers, but then applying that back in their own organization, setting themselves an implementation plan and looking at the kind of actions taken. Now we'll be kicking off next year again. We've got a second cohort midway through their journey, and there'll be the third cohort starting next year. So definitely something, if this is an area you might be interested in, it's specifically for finance professionals in organizations. And particularly those at the more senior level. And one thing that we're also looking at is how do we work with the accounting bodies in our network, and of course business schools, because I think that we really need to take some of this knowledge, these skills, these case studies to scale rapidly. And those communities really have touch points, as well, of course, on the investor side as organizations like the CFA Institute. And I think you are seeing more and more of these groupings coming together. So those are just a few things that A4S is particularly focused on, but I think it's such an important area.
Great. And then Emma, maybe on corporate boards, any perspective on how to get boards up to speed?
I think there are, again, some fantastic initiatives. One that immediately springs to mind is Chapter Zero, and the work that Chapter Zero has been doing, bringing board competency and holding all manner of different seminars and working groups to enable boards to get more competent on climate-related issues. I also think it's important to look at climate change through a diversity lens as well. And the 30% Club, which I was a member of the steering group back when it was founded and led some of the initial work with investors, has done a really interesting report with the Oliver Wyman Foundation Forum. They published a report for COP, again emphasizing the relevance of diversity, in particular gender diversity, for climate change. And not just because of women often being at the forefront of the climate change agenda and impacts around the world, but also making the most of where women are at the forefront as a customer and client on the climate change agenda, so feeding into investment and purchasing decisions. So I think, again, I found that all of the things that I have been focusing over many years, decades in some instances, are coming together around the climate change agenda and really need to be taken seriously, not just on boards, but all the way through organizations as well, making sure that those running our businesses, those that are investing on our behalf, represent the communities in which we are operating. Thank you.
I completely agree. And I just have to say a couple things here. One is, I think there's some great work by Helle Jorgensen, also with competent boards. I think I couldn't agree more with what Emma just said. I think as I elevate and step back from this, and you would ask the question, Brad, I think the reality that people are more interested is to understand why. And the reason they understand why is people are now understanding that asset valuation in the end will be impacted by people's understanding to integrate the climate change considerations, number one. Number two, asset allocation is going to be impacted. Number three, to run a modern business, to meet the stakeholder needs of today in the growing expectations. One needs to understand the broader set of things to be able to have a more sophisticated training. And I think that's where A4S is helping tremendously. And some of the other areas that were pointed out. And I do think it should be from the board, whether it's with university board training, with the various director affiliations. It is time for all of us to raise our game. And I think modern corporations will expect modern board of directors, sophisticated CFOs, sophisticated C-suite, and people cannot be tone deaf to a rising call for action, not just understanding, but smart, capable, definitive action that's going to guide the company in a modern corporation to be better suited for the future. I'll just tell you one story. People began 2 years ago think, oh, someday this could impact the markets for financial training. Well, it's impacting the insurance market. Ask the people in California when they canceled all the fire insurance. What happens when you have an asset and insurance it's not insurable? That's just a microcosm. What's happening in the muni markets? What's happening in and we have Emma here in the stock market and the other asset valuations. This is the beginning of a new and more sophisticated understanding, and it has to be factored into decision making. So I just wanted to add those comments. The time is now, and the training should be everywhere.
Okay, great. Well, I think we have time for just one quick final question. And as you know, A4S is focused fully on action. So what kind of is one action that the finance and accounting community can take over the next 12 months to deliver the biggest impact in addressing ESG issues and delivering a sustainable future? Emma, maybe first you, then Mark.
Boy, these questions are always so tough because it's never just one thing. But I do think it comes down to brave, courageous leadership to go and look at every decision we're making through that lens of a crisis, of an emergency that needs action now. Any investment we're making could be stranded in the years to come because it could wash away in a flood or melt in a heat wave. We need to be able to hold up the mirror and show that we have acted as if the world literally is on fire. Thank you.
Yeah. And I would say that I would ask one thing for every finance professional, starting with a CFO, to make a personal commitment to do all that you can. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something, and it's time to do something. But to make a personal commitment to be a student, to better understand what is possible, what is the pathway, what can I do, how can I use my influence, how can I use my voice. History shows again and again and again the power of what people can do when they lean into something. My one ask is people make a personal commitment to get on with getting on to doing something to help us here. And I think you'd be surprised at the flywheel effect of everybody starting to lean in and the positivity in terms of results that can come from that. That's what I would ask.
Great. So leadership and personal commitments as we go into 2022. Thanks so much, Emma and Mark. Appreciate your time and perspectives. And I'll hand it back over to Jessica to wrap us up for today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And so I couldn't agree more with Emma and Mark. I think leadership, collaboration, and urgent action now. I would like to thank everyone who's joined us for this year's A4S Summit plenary sessions. We'll be following up a lot of the themes that we've covered over these sessions in the coming days through a series of roundtables, but also the coming year. So please do share any thoughts that you have, any areas you're struggling with that you think we could help you to solve. And so I would now just like to play out with the message that His Royal Highness shared at the opening of the summit, in case any of you missed it. I can't think of anyone else who would be better placed to really inspire us all to the kind of leadership and action that we need. So thank you, everyone, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you to this, the 15th A4S Summit, held for the second year in virtual form. Our ability to connect across the world through technology has been one of the few silver linings from the past year or two, and one that I am sure will remain. But I do hope that next year we might be able to gather once again in person, allowing the free flow of conversation, a cup of tea, and possibly even a mince pie or two. So, as we look to recover from this pandemic, it is increasingly clear that human health, planetary health, and economic health are fundamentally interconnected. 17 years on from the time I established my Accounting for Sustainability project, A4S, and several decades more since I first started to talk and try to do something about these issues, we simply must seize the current window of opportunity to reimagine our global systems in a way that puts nature, people, and planet at the very heart of how we operate. At last year's summit, I talked about the establishment of my Sustainable Markets Initiative and the ways that you, the A4S community, could support its ambitions. Over the course of the past year, I convened a group of international CEOs to help develop a Terra Carta, a practical blueprint for action, and to catalyze the trillions of dollars needed for the transition to a sustainable future. Since then, I'm so delighted and grateful that many of your organizations have stepped forward to sign the Terra Carta. A4S is working with the SMI to contribute the vital skills that you, as finance professionals and accountants, can bring to convert the Terra Carta blueprint into action. A particular focus of this collaboration is the adoption of sustainability accounting, common metrics and standards, an area central to my A4S project since its inception. Now really is the time to move to unified metrics, global standards, and mandatory disclosure. As you all know only too well, there is a movement towards convergence of existing global standards among the standard setters, and that is of huge importance. Most recently, the A4S Foundation has established its International Sustainability Standards Board, and regulators, including within the UK, EU, across Asia and the US, are putting in place mandatory requirements. Developing a single global standard for sustainability reporting will increase consumer trust in the social, environmental, and ethical credentials of products and services, and enable investors to channel finance towards sustainable outcomes at the scale so desperately needed. I cannot thank you enough, ladies and gentlemen, for all the effort to which so many of you have devoted your time and energy over the past 2 decades in order to get us to this point. Further, through new technologies, we have the ability to tag, track, and trace supply chains in unprecedented ways. So it is time to make this level of transparency the norm. Now, I would like, if I may, to summarize the 6 key actions set out under Article 9 of the Terra Carta that you can take, which will further the ambition and deliver the results required. Firstly, encouraging the continued convergence of standards and reporting towards a single universal framework. This is absolutely critical to accelerating progress towards sustainable markets and a sustainable future. Secondly, supporting the international business, financial, and accounting communities to complete the job of establishing a unified, coherent, global system of mainstream reporting of ESG factors in cooperation with regulators and leading voluntary standards. Thirdly, outlining opportunities to enhance global sustainability policy harmonization, integration, and coherence. Differences in policy across regions creates distortions in economic activity by changing the incentives of businesses and also increasing corporate costs. The net consequence is lowered productivity and allocation of resources to manage corporate compliance with policy differences, rather than productive activities such as innovation. Fourthly, integrating sustainability into management systems to bring parity of sustainability data with other business metrics, which will help to redefine value measurement and improve decision-making. Fifthly, improving company-wide understanding of sustainability standards, metrics and industry benchmarks, including for board members, employees, shareholders, clients, suppliers and consumers. And finally, focusing on the integration of data to enable sustainable value chains. These efforts aim to enable responsible decision-making, trust and transparency, while creating sustainability metrics at parity with other business data. Ladies and gentlemen, over the coming months, A4S will continue to work with the SMI and its 10 transition alliances to support these actions along the value chains of the highest emitting and polluting industries. Further, A4S is working with members of its global CFO accounting bodies and asset owner networks to develop practical guidance and examples, which I hope will be of assistance to you all. This work will help to showcase examples of the 6 action areas that I have summarized as part of the first annual report showing progress against the Terra Carta. I can only urge you to contribute to this work if you possibly can. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on the cusp of a tipping point where sustainable business might finally become business as usual. The A4S community continues to grow with the newest chapter of the CFO Leadership Network now established in the Asia-Pacific region, and more of you making ambitious commitments as well as putting tangible roadmaps in place. There is no excuse for inaction. Indeed, those who do not act will be left behind. My Accounting for Sustainability project is providing you with the guidance, tools and training required. My only hope is that you can learn from these examples and take heart from the success of the members of the various A4S networks. Ladies and gentlemen, to seize this moment of acceleration, we simply must work together within and across all sectors of the global economy in order to transition rapidly to a sustainable future. It is easy to feel completely overwhelmed by the scale of the challenges we face. Instead, I can only encourage you to roll up your sleeves, set clear, short and long-term plans, and be energized by the opportunities that exist if we work together to create a vibrant, sustainable economy with nature, people and planet at its heart.